Our featured speaker, Mel Tidwell. Mel was born in Lakeland, Florida, lived on a small family farm, and was a dedicated musician throughout his school years. Mel joined the Navy at the age of 18 after submarine training in Groton, Connecticut. He was stationed on a submarine in Hawaii. After 10 years in the Navy, Mel left the Navy and started working for Lockheed Martin. He traveled the world as an engineer, working on Navy ships in the U.S. and around the world. He left Lockheed in 1996. In 1997, he worked as a boiler technician at Yellowstone National Park. That sounds fun. Okay. After driving across the U.S. a few times, Mel took a job with Gulfstream Aerospace in Savannah, Georgia. He eventually returned to Lockheed in Huntsville, Alabama in 2003. There he met his spouse, John Pewitt, who is our pianist, music director, and our beloved president emeritus of the church. What? Yes, he is beloved. Okay. Am I missing something? Okay. Okay. Oh, I know. In our heart. Okay. Mel and John have been members here since 2018. Mel retired from Lockheed in 2017 and moved with John to their home in Blue Ridge. Mel now spends his time cooking, which we are all very grateful for. Yes, gardening and cleaning and taking care of John and Bo, the protector of the gardens and all-around love dog. Thanks to the support and love of this congregation, Mel was encouraged to apply and was added to the pulpit directory as a Unitarian layperson for the UUA Southern Region. As such, Mel is eligible to speak at UU churches throughout the Southern region and has been a recent speaker at several UU congregations and other venues. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm glad to be back. It's been a while. I spoke a few months ago at Northwestern UUC in Sandy Springs, and I shared the topic, free speech shouldn't be free. I wrote that for us here at Mountain Light a few years ago. And as I was preparing, I started to make updates and changes. So much has happened. Our humanity is once again teetering. We have become so obsessed with winning that we have lost ourselves. I ask myself if we were good ancestors. Did we tell enough stories, or were we too focused on winning? Because we now have a large part of our country that seems to be okay with our own genocide and rolling back the successes we have achieved towards being truly equal. I found myself wondering if we did our job. I have no biological children. I think I always knew I wouldn't be a good parent. There were pieces missing that I didn't know. It has taken me years of looking at who I was and who I wanted to become, but never really had a clear idea to see it all. Many thought that because I was a strict disciplinarian and had a great career, I would be a good father, but there's a lot more to it than that. I am lucky that I have people that have called me dad, and it's a choice they made. It's my honor. This is my apology to them all. My life began to change forever more than a decade ago. I never imagined I could have the life I have now. Someone that loves me every day, a man that sits with me at night and enjoys breakfast together in the morning. My life was busy and harried, traveling the world. I experienced more than most people on the planet ever will. I'm sure it seemed like this wonderful life. As I now have time to sit and see where I have been, I can begin to feel it. I had no love life outside of you all, my family. My career demanded I stay alone. I've talked about it many times of having to hide in plain sight. So in I would swoop with presents from afar, being Uncle Elf, hoping to make a time of happiness as if that was the most important thing. It was not. Instead of presents, movies, trips to Disney World, or an exotic vacation, I should have spoken to you about school, history, trauma, and what I have survived, what our country has survived, what our country has strived for, and what we believed. None of you really know the shoes I have walked in or some of the big steps I took along the way. My first marriage to Marilee, I shake my head thinking what a disaster that was and what an idiot I was. That would be a longer story than I have time for today, but she was part of the ruse I had to play for decades. At the end of my first tour in the Navy, I was not prepared for a path in civilian life, so I re-enlisted. To most, that would be just a simple step. They want everyone to re-enlist. It's expensive training people to operate and repair weapon systems. You see, I had come out as being gay during group therapy sessions I was forced to attend after testing positive for cannabis. That was in 1982 or 1983. That's also when I called home from Hawaii and told my parents that I was gay. Then I immediately got on the phone to my number one, my sister, who's been there for me since birth. She's online today. I asked her to go over and check on them and make sure they were okay. She did, and the next time I spoke to my mother, she said, "Well, I don't want this thrown up in my face or talked about at the dinner table." So I even had to hide at home. But back to the story. When you're re-enlisting, you are interviewed by your superiors. When I met with my executive officer, he said he would not allow me to re-enlist because I was a homosexual. That was against regulations back then. I was kind of shocked because I was now married to my second wife, Tisa, and I didn't know he knew because it had been hidden in my medical records, not in my personnel file. But there I stood, facing the man who had great control over my entire life. I looked him dead in the eye and I said, "Well, sir, it seems you've allowed me to stay in for several years knowing I was gay. I guess you've broken regulations too." It was his turn to be shook. Needless to say, I walked out with his signature and his approval. That afternoon, my division officer pulled me aside and said, "Don't ever tell anyone you're gay again." Years later, when I reconnected with my friends from that ship, they told me that they had been harassed because of me after I was transferred for the same reasons. But during this time in my life is when the AIDS epidemic was beginning and running rampant. We were all terrified. No one knew what it was, how it started, or how it spread, but it was spreading rapidly. It was called the queer disease, and it only killed faggots. The President of the United States would not even say the words HIV or AIDS, much less provide funding for research. This is when I changed my political affiliation. I could not become a full-fledged activist because I was in the Navy, but I went to pride marches and supported how I could. I should have told you more stories about holding babies in the AIDS ward at the hospital. The disease had finally broken out of the gay community. It became national news that hospitals across the country now had children with the disease. parents had caught it through needle exchange and passed it on to the unborn. I wish I had told you about my amazing friend Walter. He fought hard for decades, but finally succumbed, and I should have shared many struggles through the early days of this disease with friends. I wish I had told you about all the loneliness. So many of us lived in terror, now afraid to even touch each other. Can you imagine living like that? We already had to live in shadows. Gay men and women were treated as criminals. The Stonewall riots had happened in 1969, but we still weren't free. This was a big time of enlightenment for me. All I wanted was to have what I have now. I eventually left the Navy, but my life stayed on the same trajectory, still working with homophobic men that had mostly disdain for me unless I was helping them. After all of this, we now, 2026, have significant HIV funding cuts occurring globally and domestically. In 2025, with UNAIDS warning of the worst setback in decades, driven by U.S. aid pauses and proposed congressional reductions that eliminate key programs like EHE, ending the HIV epidemic, and slashing Ryan White funding, risking millions of new infections and deaths by reversing decades of progress. The current administration has also closed the 988 National LGBTQ+ Crisis Hotline, a center that fielded approximately 70,000 calls a month. The administration argued that the general 988 line could handle these calls and alleged the service fostered gender ideology beliefs. I have shared some stories from my time in Yellowstone National Park, but I wish I had shared how fragile it is, how overused it is, yet underused at the same time. During our check-in and training, we learned that out of the approximately 4 million visitors yearly, 99% of them never get more than a mile away from their vehicle. Out of the 1% that does venture away, 99% of those were people like me working in the park. So that's what I say when I mean the parks are overused but underused at the same time. Millions flock to our parks each year, but most don't truly see them as I have. During my time, I had two friends, Adam and Bill, both much younger than me, and we backpacked 20 miles into the wilderness. I remember sitting by the fire and hearing a sound we thought was an airplane, only to realize it was a pair of trumpeter swans nesting on a pond 50 yards from our campsite. It's an amazing memory. We backpacked into Pebble Creek for July 4th weekend, and as we were sitting by the fire, surrounded by nature, listening to a pack of wolves howl along the mountain's ridgeline and descend to hunt the wapiti in the meadow near us, I was there just 2 years after the wolves were reintroduced, and I arrived 1 week after an indigenous woman threw guts on the politicians over the treatment of bison. This time living among one of our greatest natural wonders opened my eyes to the park system and how it is managed. My mom and dad had taught us to respect nature. This time, that summer spent in 1997, was my awakening to the politics around our park system, about the large and constant push to allow mining within the boundaries, the constant fights to save bison and wolves and so many other species. Our parks are under attack again. The current Congress and administration have proposed huge funding cuts to our national parks. Their ideas are to close hundreds of parks and turn thousands of them over to state control. I truly believe the end goal is to make them financially insolvent so the politicians can sell mining rights to their lobbyists. After that eye-awakening summer, I landed in Savannah, Georgia. While I was living there, there was a giant anti-abortion protest. It was lining both sides of the street, the main thoroughfare. I think it was Abercorn. I don't necessarily remember. But they were all out there holding their signs and banners and singing Jesus songs. I decided to go into a shop and make my own sign about choice. It was ripped from my hands as I was yelled at, accosted, and bullied, but they didn't know me. I turned around and walked right back in the shop for another piece of poster board, and now in big letters I wrote, "I am standing amid fascist oppressors." Most of them had no idea what that meant, but it was once again ripped from my hand and I was bullied away. But this was my first time standing all alone for a cause. We now know that the right to safe pregnancy care is no longer a right. We have the woman here in Georgia that was kept alive because she was pregnant. Her family didn't want this, and now that baby is still in intensive care and will most likely have a very difficult life of medical issues if he survives at all. Today, I would tell you about our ancestors that infected thousands of native peoples with smallpox. Indigenous people had no immunity to the disease running rampant across Europe. It was primarily spread through contact, but there are documents indicating we as a nation used infected blankets as biological warfare to eradicate more of them. I would tell you about the expansions westward and how it was not bonanza or gun smoke. We only learned the good parts. Early settlers escaped Europe for lots of reasons: religious freedom, economic opportunity, and not least, political liberty. They yearned for the freedom to live outside the king's rule. They wanted free from taxation, austerity, and subjugation under a fiefdom. There was not a state anywhere in the world in the late 18th century that had as wide variety of people as our country. It is remarkable the way that the nation ends up cohering, not around culture, not around religion, not around ancient history. It was coming together around a set of purposes and ideals for one common cause. The stories we have all been taught have only some base in reality. The parts we don't talk about are what came after the first settlers that were escaping. This invasion to conquer land, take away from others what was not accessible under the kings of other countries. Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. The first enslaved Africans arrived in English-occupied North America in August of 1619. The Mayflower didn't land until 1620. That's 128 years from Christopher Columbus until the Mayflower. What we never learned was that democracy had been alive on our continent for thousands of years. We were not the creators of democracy. We now know that tribes had formed unions to govern. This would become even more prevalent during westward expansion. Tribes formed even greater unions to try and defend their land against the westward expansion and genocide. Yet we called them savages. It would take another 156 years for us to become our separate country and adopt our Constitution. That was 1776. We had changed as a nation, but not as a people. We still thought slavery was a necessity, a part of normal life. We put humans in chains and beat them to do our will. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't happen until 1862. This was supposed to be our way to freedom for all. Then in 1882, just 20 years later, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was the first ever legislation to exclude any people from anywhere. We were a nation screaming for freedoms while oppressing those captured, kidnapped, and forced into slavery. Did you hear that? We have stood our country up as a beacon of change, that guiding light of freedom, all while denying it to so many others. This year, our country turns 250 years old. I wish I could say that all of these problems are in our past, but unfortunately, they are not. I would talk to you about your inalienable rights. I should have told you your worth and dignity is important, but also fragile. I recently heard the words, "He was beaten by a girl," just roll right off my lips. I stopped dead in my tracks and realized what I had said. Like, how damn demeaning is that? It's been an innocuous statement that I never took the time to see its effects. Of course men can be beaten by girls. Why was I perpetuating this misogyny? I can testify as living proof that as generations go by, we forget the why behind things. They seem so distant, but they really aren't. My sister was sent home from school for wearing pants. Our lifetime. Can you imagine your daughters being sent home for wearing pants? Now they're sent home for wearing them too short. In my lifetime, women couldn't have a credit card. Very few banks would lend women money. That meant that basically women weren't allowed to own anything. John and I have a friend that has been in the U.S. since she was a child. She was brought here by her parents trying to find a better life for their children. She's married to an American, well-educated, and has a great career in the medical field. She was trying to go through the legal channels to become a citizen, but was denied. She must now leave the country to Mexico, a place she doesn't know. Her entire family lives here, including her parents. This is what we've become. I wish I had been smarter to do better. I wish I had talked about deregulation in the media and how the support for Israel only became widespread when it was rolled into political, religious rhetoric. Underneath this is a continued disdain for the Jewish people in our country. Anti-Semitism has never left our shores. I know and hear the name spoken in shadow, just as my queer name has been. Did you know that most of our government during World War II was openly anti-Semitic? When the Nazi regime rose to power and began their Holocaust, they had to find a way to make their own citizens illegals. They only had to look at America and how we treated our minorities. Who were we to talk? Blacks couldn't vote. Women had no rights. But then America got busy. It took decades to win legislation and become a place where, at least on paper, we are all in fact created equal. I'm sorry that we never spoke of these things, and I bring it up now because we are repeating the tragedies of our past. Just as happened in Germany, we now have a president that openly calls me leftist scum and his enemy that he hates. We have all these fringe groups and actors influencing all branches of our government. Now, sure, most administrations skew information to control the narrative while skirting at the edges of law. We know that. But when you begin to place that in conjunction with all the other actions that to many may seem individual occurrences, a picture emerges. ICE agents wearing masks freely roaming. I have a large suspicion that these are members of January 6ers, Proud Boys, and Oath Keepers that wear masks to not be discovered through facial recognition. So we as a people don't put that in the heap with pardoning them to make a privately controlled militia. We don't add in the rhetoric from podcasters like Laura Loomer and Charlie Kirk that say something and the next day becomes a position of our government. We don't connect the dots of newscasters' statement of removing DEI initiatives to make us truly equal as just another screen of supremacy. These people are being invited to the highest levels of our administration and given a loud voice. Hell, we now know that Charlie Kirk, a man that through his rhetoric wished me dead, a man that spoke of removing women from the workplace and putting them back in the home where they belong. He openly demeaned minorities as inferior. A guy so right-wing, he said people would have to die in order to keep the Second Amendment. This dude met his karma. This hateful man who meant nothing to me above any other victim of gun violence is being lauded with holidays and statues and forced quotas at universities. After his murder, so many were outraged and even more said they didn't know who he was. What a privilege it must be to be able to walk around and not know. I mean, it was okay because he wasn't coming after you. As we see daily, our societal restrictions have failed us for now. Our justice system is now at the whim of the president. Our country has put in place a pyramid that has the end goal at all costs. It doesn't matter that millions are gathering to protest across the country. We have masks wandering the streets, declaring people illegal and shipping them where? For what? We now have our own armed troops in the streets for the sole purpose of using those weapons on our citizens. Did you hear me? Those weapons are to be pointed at us. This is not anti-terrorist. This is not to stop crime. This is exactly what began our American Revolution in 1768. England had sent ships and thousands of soldiers to be used against its own citizens. This was the final straw for the settlers of America. Yet here we are again, facing off against weapons turned against us by our own government, all while the president says he will attack Iran if they turn weapons against their own protesters. Yeah. Did you hear that? He will attack Iran for using weapons against protesters, but it's okay for him to use them against us? Yeah. I could go on, and it is all baffling. But I ask myself, did we spend enough time telling the next generations what we saw and survived? Were we too busy passing legislation about freedom and didn't tell the stories we needed to tell those we love? I know the thought process is exhausting. I know history lessons forever. But when you get down to it, that's what history is, the telling of stories. Our ancestors didn't have radio and television, and they definitely didn't have the internet. They sat by candlelight and read stories. They shared from where they came. This is where we didn't do our jobs. There are so many in our society that have never heard the stories of why we need policies of inclusion. Our children don't know our struggles. They look around and see black CEOs and people in government and wonder why we needed those protections. Things seem fine because we made it seem that way. Without knowing and understanding why these protections were needed in the first place, they just become political fodder. My entire life has been political fodder, and I guess it will be until I'm gone. I thought I would be able to retire to the mountains and have a quiet existence. I didn't know I would need to be once again living my life on edge, constantly worried if my freedoms that are still under attack are the next ones on the list. I'm walking around confused at where I live, honestly. I'm glad that so many feel the freedoms our generations worked for. We have made huge strides towards equality. Let's not let it disappear because we forgot why we needed them in the first place. Speak to your kids and your grandkids. Don't leave them to TikTok and Facebook reels. Share what you have experienced. Those stories resonate much more with them. People remember the stories they grow up hearing. It shapes us for the future, and as we see, it is disturbingly difficult to change attitudes of hate once they've infiltrated. So here is my charge to you and myself. Talk to your children. Talk to your grandchildren. Do not outsource moral formation to algorithms. Tell them what you saw. Tell them what you survived. Tell them why these protections exist. Because if we do not, someone else will tell them a different story. And hate is always eager to fill a silence. Did we do our jobs? Maybe not fully, but we are still here. And the work of being good ancestors is not over. And if nothing else, this is why I am a Unitarian Universalist. Because we believe truth is still unfolding, and telling the truth is holy work. Shalom, namaste, assalamu alaikum, amen.